before the roar of the arena, before the sand turned red beneath the Roman sun, there was ritual. Tonight, you will hear the story of blood and honor, of men who fought not only for life, but for meaning. This is not a tale of heroes or monsters. It is a history carved in stone, the story of the gladiators. From sacred funerals in the ancient lands of the Etruscans to the mighty arenas of Rome, where emperors watched and cheered, to the rebellion that shook the empire itself. Every drop of blood had a purpose. Behind the screams of the crowd, there was faith, politics, and the illusion of freedom. You will walk with them through the training schools, the underground cells, the echoing tunnels beneath the Colosseum. You will hear their footsteps, their prayers, and their final breaths before the gates opened. So close your eyes. Let the sound of the arena surround you. This is the journey through time, from ritual sacrifice to the spectacle of empire. This is the blood of the arena, the true history of the gladiators. Long before Rome, before the marble, the banners, and the roar of crowds, there were the Etruscans in their sacred lands, where mist rose over the valleys of northern Italy. Death was not an ending. It was a passage, a door that required ritual, a sacrifice to guide the spirit into the afterlife. They believed that when a man of power died, another life must end beside his. A symbol, a tribute, a companion for the journey beyond. And so, in their funerals, men fought. Not for glory, not for the crowd, but for the dead. The sound of wood against metal echoed through the burial grounds. Blood fell on the earth, sacred, red, necessary. It was said that the gods watched, weighing courage and weakness, deciding which soul deserved to follow the noble into eternity. The people gathered quietly, not to cheer, but to witness. To them, the fight was holy, a message to the underworld, that even in death, men could prove their worth. The Etruscans called it munus, the duty, a gift of blood offered in respect, not entertainment. But Rome was watching, and Rome never forgot how to turn faith into power. From these rituals of mourning would rise the greatest spectacle the ancient world had ever known. Not a ceremony for the dead, but a theater for the living. Rome learned quickly what the Etruscans had done to honor the dead. The Romans would learn to use for the living. At first, it was still a funeral offering, blood given to the spirits of the noble dead. But in the streets of a growing city, honor became spectacle. Families of power, the Bruti, the Scipiones, sought to outdo one another in magnificence. They built wooden arenas in the forum, paid for fighters, and invited the people to watch. What had been a ritual of faith became a stage for politics. The crowd shouted, not for the gods, but for their patrons. Each cheer was a vote, each death a promise of loyalty. Rome had found a new language, the language of entertainment. Wooden stands grew into stone. The private games of noble families became public events of the state. The word munus, once duty, now meant show. Men fought to honor consuls, to celebrate victories, to please the masses during festivals. And slowly, Rome discovered something dangerous, that a city of 1,000,000 souls could be ruled by two things, bread and spectacle. The blood was still there, the ritual remained, but its meaning had changed forever. The people came not to mourn, but to feel alive, and the Senate watched with interest. For where the crowd looked, power followed. The Romans had taken the silence of the Etruscans and filled it with thunder. The age of the games had begun. Rome hungered for a stage worthy of its power. Temporary wooden arenas were not enough. The people demanded something greater, something that would make the gods look down in envy. The first stone amphitheaters rose from the dust of Campania. Curving seats of limestone embraced the sand. Gates carved for beasts and men. Tunnels winding beneath for blood and ceremony. When the generals returned from war, they built bigger ones. Each arena a monument to victory. The most magnificent stood in the heart of Rome, the Amphitheatrum Flavium, which the world would call the Colosseum. 40,000 seats of marble, 80 arches that swallowed sunlight. Beneath the floor, a labyrinth of pulleys, cages, and corridors. Lions roared from the dark. Drums rolled like thunder, and the sand waited, perfect and golden. The people filled the stands before dawn. They came for blood, yes, but also for belonging. In the arena, rich and poor sat side by side, united by the same thrill, the same illusion that the empire was eternal. The emperor himself watched from the Pulvinar, the imperial seat above the crowd. A single gesture of his hand decided life or death. To them, the games were proof of Rome's order, of civilization itself. But beneath the beauty of the marble, under the roar of 10,000 voices, the earth remembered what it once was, a graveyard. The sand that glittered beneath the sun was still the same soil that had drunk the blood of the dead. Rome had built its glory upon the bones of a ritual. And as the Colosseum rose toward the heavens, the shadows below grew deeper. Beneath the shining heart of Rome, another world existed. A world of sweat, discipline, and silence. The Ludi Gladiatori, the schools where men were remade into symbols. They came from everywhere. Prisoners of war, slaves, condemned men, and sometimes even free citizens seeking glory or gold. Once they crossed the gates, their names were taken away. They became property of the lanista, the trainer, the master, the man who owned their fates. In the mornings, they trained under the burning sun. They learned the balance of the sword, the precision of the net, the rhythm of combat that the crowd demanded. Each fighter had a style, a destiny in the arena. The Murmillo with his great shield and heavy blade, the Retiarius, fast and graceful, armed only with a net and trident. The Thrakes, agile and fierce, with curved sword and visor shaped like wings. They fought with wooden weapons at first, the blows echoing like thunder in the dusty courtyards. The lanista watched everything: posture, hesitation, fear. To him, fear was currency. The right amount kept a man alive. Too much, and he was useless. By night, they were locked in cells. They ate barley gruel and drank water thick with dust. Yet among them, something strange grew. A code, an honor that even the free citizens could not understand. They were slaves, yes, but inside the walls of the ludus, they earned what the streets of Rome could never give: respect. When they trained, the guards watched with awe. When they passed in chains through the markets, people stepped aside, for these were not common men. These were the ones chosen to face death and make it beautiful. In the darkness of the barracks, one could hear them whisper to each other, "We die once, but the crowd will remember forever." In the ludus began with silence. The men woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the clang of keys, and the smell of oil and sand. Each morning they prepared, polishing armor that wasn't theirs, tightening straps, feeling the weight of the sword that might one day betray them. Their bodies bore scars like maps, proof that they had survived, at least until now. For most, life was measured in fights. A dozen victories meant better food, fewer chains, a name the crowd might cheer. But one mistake, and the sand would take you. On the day of the games, the city awoke before sunrise. Trumpets sounded across the hills, and lines of people flooded the Colosseum, carrying bread, wine, and the hunger for spectacle. Beneath the arena, in the dark corridors called hypogeum, the gladiators waited. Some prayed, some whispered their names, hoping someone, somewhere, would remember. The day would remember. The gates opened with a roar. Light and heat exploded into their eyes. The crowd stood as one, 50,000 voices calling for blood, for beauty, for Rome. The fight began not with rage, but with rhythm. Steel struck steel, sand turned red, and the sound of breathing filled the air. Each movement was art, every death choreography. The gladiator's body was both weapon and message, proof that pain could be turned into perfection. And when the moment came, when one fell to his knees and raised his hand in surrender, all eyes turned to the emperor. A raised thumb meant mercy. A turned one meant death. The crowd shouted its will, and the emperor obeyed. For even he was a servant of spectacle. One gesture, one breath, and another soul joined the sand. But sometimes a fighter was spared, granted the rudis, a wooden sword that meant freedom. Few ever earned it. Fewer still knew what to do with it. For once you have lived before 50,000 hearts, once you have heard them chant your name, silence is harder than death. Within the walls of the ludus, there were no laws, only the code. Not written, not spoken aloud, but carried in every scar and stare. A gladiator did not fight for hatred. He fought for the perfection of the moment. The clean strike, the unbroken rhythm, the death that meant something. They lived knowing that every match could be the last, so each gesture mattered. To fall without fear was a kind of victory. When one fell in the arena, his opponent was expected to lower his weapon, to wait for the verdict. If mercy was granted, the victor saluted the emperor, raised his arm to the crowd, and bowed to the fallen. If death was ordered, it had to be swift, clean, worthy. Even in blood, there was grace. Outside the arena, citizens called them beasts, but inside, among themselves, they called each other brother. When one died, the others buried him with honor. They carved his name into stone, set a helmet or a sword above the grave. And when the games began again, they fought harder, not for Rome, but for those who had fallen before them. They believed that courage was a language the gods could hear, that a man's worth was measured not in victories, but in how he met his end. And so, in the roar of the crowd and the shadow of death, there lived a quiet kind of nobility, one the world has long forgotten. From the ashes of discipline and obedience, one name rose like fire: Spartacus. He had been a soldier once, a Thracian captured by Rome, sold to the ludus of Capua, trained beneath the whip of the Lanista Batiatus. But Spartacus did not believe in fate. To him, chains were not destiny. They were a challenge. One night, under the moonlight of Capua, the gladiators planned their escape. They seized kitchen knives, iron spits, whatever they could find. Dozens fled into the hills. A few were caught, but Spartacus and his followers vanished into the countryside, carrying not just hope, but rage. From a band of 70 men, they grew into an army of slaves, thousands strong. Farmers and shepherds joined them, each man choosing a sword over a chain. The fields of southern Italy burned. Villas were emptied. Roman blood answered for Roman blood. In the arenas of Rome, the crowds whispered his name as a curse and a dream. For the first time, a gladiator was no longer a symbol of submission, but of rebellion. Rome sent legion after legion. Each one fell. The Senate panicked. The people marveled. How could men who were born to die learn so quickly how to live? For 2 years, the rebellion raged across Italy. But power, like freedom, is a flame that devours itself. At the foot of Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus was cornered. His army shattered. The roads to Rome lined with crucified bodies. 6,000 souls nailed to the fate they had tried to escape. Yet, even in defeat, Spartacus became immortal. For he had shown the empire its own reflection, that the same blood which fed its glory could one day rise against it. Rome had learned its lesson. Rebellion could not be crushed by silence. It had to be drowned in noise. After Spartacus, the empire rebuilt the games greater than ever before. The message was clear. The arena belongs to Rome, and Rome belongs to no man. Emperors competed to outshine their predecessors. Julius Caesar staged 400 fights in a single festival. Augustus filled entire lakes with ships to reenact sea battles. And when the Flavian emperors rose to power, they gave the people a gift unlike any other. The Colosseum, its arches framed the sky. Its corridors could swallow 50,000 voices. It was not merely a building. It was an empire carved in stone. The games now lasted for days, sometimes months. Morning began with beasts, lions, tigers, elephants, brought from across the world. The crowd gasped as hunters fought them with spears, or watched condemned men be torn apart as justice. By midday, executions turned to duels. Steel clashed, blood sprayed against marble, and the people roared in delight. In the evening came the stars, the champions, the ones whose names echoed through Rome. They were adored like gods, their portraits painted on walls, their faces carved in stone, their deaths remembered as poetry. The emperors sat above, smiling, their hands steady over the fate of men. For them, the arena was more than entertainment. It was control. Every cheer, every death, every gesture of mercy reminded the crowd who held power, and how easily it could vanish. Rome called it spectaculum, a spectacle. But beneath the gold and glory, the meaning of the games had long been lost. What began as honor for the dead had become the empire's favorite lie, that blood could buy peace, and death could prove civilization. Behind the roar of the arena, there were men who never fought, yet they controlled every drop of blood that fell on the sand. They were the Linistae, the editors, and the sponsors of death, the true masters of the games. The Linista owned the schools, the men, the weapons, and the silence of those who trained. He bargained with senators and generals, traded fighters like livestock, and calculated profit from pain. Each gladiator had a price: his strength, his victories, even his scars had value. But above the lanista stood the editor, the one who organized the games. Often a noble or a rising politician, he paid for the spectacle out of his own fortune, buying the love of the crowd in return. Bread and blood became currency. The people cheered not for justice, but for whoever gave them the grandest show. In the emperor's reign, the spectacle grew into empire business. Gold flowed like water. Merchants sold armor, exotic animals, perfumes, banners, and even the sand was chosen carefully. Fine, golden, absorbent. The games had become Rome's mirror. Beautiful, brutal, and precise. The masters of death stood unseen behind the marble walls, counting the cheers, balancing mercy against spectacle, knowing that every roar from the crowd was a reminder of their power. And the gladiators, beneath their armor and dust, played their parts with grace. They had become Rome's most valuable illusion, slaves who made men feel free. When the day ended and the crowds went home, the lanista locked his gates. He looked at his ledgers, at the names scratched into parchment, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, Rome will hunger again." The empire had never been stronger. Its borders stretched from the sands of Africa to the icy rivers of the north. And, in the heart of it all, Rome. The games became the heartbeat of the world. Under emperors like Nero, Titus, and Trajan, the arena was no longer a place of punishment. It was the empire's stage, a mirror of its glory. Nero filled the gardens of his golden house with torchlight and music, turning death into theater. Titus celebrated the opening of the Colosseum with 100 days of games. 10,000 men and beasts meeting their end beneath the sun. And under Trajan, the games reached their zenith. 123 days of spectacle. Lions from Numidia, leopards from Asia, bears from the mountains of Germania, all brought to die for Rome's amusement. The sand was never clean. It was swept, raked, and stained again. A living memory of everything the empire refused to forget. The gladiators had become stars, artists of violence, known by name, adored by the people. Women threw flowers as they passed. Children played with toy swords carved in their likeness. Their faces appeared on lamps, mosaics, and silver cups, proof that even the doomed could become divine. Rome believed itself eternal. The emperors promised peace, Pax Romana, and the arena was its proof. But peace built on spectacle is fragile. For every roar of triumph, a whisper grew stronger beneath the marble, that the gods were watching, and that no empire lasts forever. In the golden light of its glory, Rome could not see the shadows gathering. Glory never lasts forever. What was once divine spectacle began to rot from within. Rome had grown tired of conquest, of greatness, of its own reflection. The emperors still promised magnificence, but the crowds came less for awe and more for distraction. The games, once sacred, had become routine. Blood no longer shocked. Death no longer moved the heart. The old honor of the gladiators, the code of courage, of grace, was fading. Many fighters now entered the arena half-trained, condemned criminals and debtors, thrown to the beasts, sacrificed not for art, but for noise. The sand, once golden, turned gray with the weight of repetition. And in the shadows, a new voice began to rise. The voice of those who worshipped a single God, who refused to kneel before idols of stone or blood. The Christians called the games a sin. They spoke of mercy, compassion, and the sanctity of every life. The empire called them heretics, yet their words spread through slaves, merchants, soldiers, and even among the spectators themselves. Some began to look away when the sword fell. Some left before the fights began. The roar of the Colosseum grew weaker. The torches burned lower. Even the emperors changed. Constantine, the first to embrace the cross, banned certain forms of blood sport. Others followed, not out of pity, but because Rome itself was changing. The empire that once ruled the world was collapsing under the weight of its own spectacle. And so, quietly, the games began to die. Time is the greatest conqueror. The crowds vanished. The trumpets stopped. The great Colosseum, once the heart of Rome's glory, became a shell of stone and memory. The emperors fell. The banners faded, and the sand that had drunk the blood of thousands lay untouched beneath the rain. The gates rusted shut, the tunnels filled with dust and silence. For the first time in centuries, the earth beneath Rome knew peace. The Christians who once died in the arena now prayed in its shadow. The cross rose where the emperor's throne had been. Some said the ghosts still walked there, men of dust and memory, fighting forever in the dreams of the stone. Centuries later, travelers came and called it a ruin. They spoke softly when they stood among its arches, not from reverence, but from awe. The Colosseum, stripped of its marble and gold, remained a skeleton of empire, a reminder that even the mightiest fall. Grass grew where lions once roared. Flowers bloomed through cracks in the stone. The air carried no cheers, only the whisper of wind through broken walls. The games were over. The empire was gone. But the arena endured. Patient, eternal, watching humanity rebuild and forget. And if you stand there today, when the city sleeps and the night is still, you might hear it, the faint echo of applause beneath the earth, the ghost of a sword striking sand. The silence of the arenas is not emptiness. It is memory, the breath of history that refuses to fade. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. New faiths, new kings, new wars, all built their worlds upon the bones of Rome. The Colosseum slept beneath ivy and dust. Travelers spoke of it as a wound upon the earth, a place where ghosts whispered in Latin and shadows moved when no wind blew. But in time, curiosity awoke where fear had been. Renaissance scholars wandered among the ruins, their torches casting gold light on ancient arches. They saw not death, but design. Mathematics carved in stone, geometry that had survived the gods themselves. Artists came next. Painters sketched the broken walls. Poets wrote of fallen glory. And historians tried to read the stories etched into marble and dust. By the 18th century, Rome had become a museum of its own past. Tourists walked where emperors once sat. They touched the stone and felt time breathe back at them. Archaeologists began to dig. They found bones, armor, fragments of mosaics stained red with iron and clay. The arena revealed itself slowly, layer by layer, ghost by ghost. In Pompeii, another world was found beneath the ash. A smaller amphitheater, frozen mid-scream, paintings of gladiators, still bright after 1,000 years. Names scratched into the walls by forgotten fans. The scholars called it the archaeology of memory. For every discovery was a resurrection, every artifact a heartbeat. The world remembered the gladiators once more, not as slaves, not as killers, but as men who lived fiercely in a time when death itself was a stage. And in the quiet halls of museums, behind glass and light, their helmets still shine. Reflections of a world that refused to stay buried. The Colosseum still stands. Its arches rise like the ribs of a sleeping giant. And tourists walk where lions once roared. The sand is gone. The blood has dried. Yet the story remains. 2,000 years later, the word gladiator still stirs the heart. It has crossed centuries and languages, changing shape, but never losing its fire. In paintings, they are martyrs of courage. In books, tragic heroes. In films, they rise again, their swords gleaming under the lights of another kind of arena. The crowd is different now. No longer 50,000 voices beneath the sun, but millions of faces behind screens, cheering for stories instead of survival. Yet, the feeling is the same. the desire to see struggle, to witness strength, to find meaning in the edge between life and death. The gladiator has never truly died. He lives in every soldier who stands his ground, every athlete who pushes beyond pain, every soul who fights unseen battles and rises again. His armor may be gone, his sand replaced by steel and light, but the spirit, the defiance of fate, endures. The world remembers him not because he fought, but because he faced the impossible and made it art. Beneath the ruins of Rome, the earth still holds the echo of the arena, the sound of courage, the rhythm of hearts refusing to surrender. And when the wind moves through the arches, it carries a whisper across the centuries. We who are about to die still live. And so, the story of the gladiators comes to rest. What began as a ritual of blood for the dead became a song of courage for the living. From the shadows of the Etruscan graves to the roaring heart of Rome, they fought not only for survival, but for meaning. Their world was cruel, their fate uncertain. Yet, in their struggle, we see ourselves. Every generation builds its own arena. The weapons change, the crowds evolve, but the battle, the search for dignity and purpose, remains the same. The Colosseum stands still, not as a monument to violence, but as a mirror of humanity. Its stones remember the cheers, the fear, the brief spark of life before the silence. And perhaps that is what endures most of all. Not the empire, not the spectacle, but the heartbeat of those who refused to be forgotten. So when the wind sighs through the arches of Rome, listen closely. You may hear them still. The warriors, the dreamers, the doomed, whispering through time. We fought, we fell, but we lived, and the arena, eternal and patient, breathes once more.